Hey, good evening. Welcome to On the Chain. This is Jeff here with co-host Chip. Tonight we have another amazing show for you guys, another amazing interview. We talk a lot about building in the space. There's a lot of excitement over NFTs. There's a lot of excitement in partnerships and building on the different platforms, XRPL and beyond. And we really want to dig in, understand what is the significance of the metaverse and who's building there. So we're going to hear all about that tonight. And Chip, I think we need to just go straight in. I know you've got some bios to read and you want to talk a little bit about the project before we invite the guest in. So I'm going to kick it over to you.
Let's do this. Let's
Let's
go.
go.
Welcome to On the Chain.
Yeah, welcome everybody to On the Chain. Great to be with you this Sunday night. Kickoff of the week as it goes, and there's lots of stuff to talk about. But before we bring Aaron in, I wanted to read his bio a little bit because Aaron, if you guys don't know, Aaron's a co-founder and board member. He's a director of Centrality, general partner of NetX Ventures and D64 Ventures. Just to let you know what he's done, who he is, and just so you can get a little bit better picture when we bring him in. And back in 2019, he was named Ernst & Young EY Technology Entrepreneur of the Year, an incredible honor. IDG Top 50 Technology Leaders. And then before Centrality, his career included 20 plus years in technology as an engineer, product developer, and a business leader. Aaron has deep experience in startup tech. He's going to talk about that a little bit tonight. He's also a board member or founder of over a dozen high growth tech companies and an investor in over 50 ventures. Aaron's experience in the NFT space includes being involved with founding universe.xyz. Also, he co-founded Non Fungible Labs, which developed FLUF World, which we're going to get into and talk about that, as well as the altered state machine. Aaron's diverse portfolio experience offers him a unique perspective and opportunities on the challenges of global tech. And without further ado, let's bring in Aaron McDonald. Aaron, welcome to On the Chain.
Welcome, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, man. And what an accomplished career. You don't look old enough to have accomplished all that in your I mean, it's just
I'm older than I look.
You've done a lot. Well, whatever you're doing it well, man. You must be eating right. So
Drink
the whole
kombucha. That'll be my recommendation.
Listen, I drink kombucha all the time, man. I love it. My wife and I have we have a whole refrigerator in our garage filled with kombucha, man. And
look at Chip. Chip's actually 75, so he's looking
75. How does it look? Doing all right, right?
You're doing good.
Doing all right. I think that's what I thought. I'm doing okay. Holding it together still. So when you so talk about being an engineer. So kind of just take us through a little bit, just so we can get a little bit of a picture. But you started out as an engineer. Is this what you went to school for? Is this what your thoughts were? Like, what did you want to do when you grew up? You thought, I'm going to go into engineering?
No, not really. I grew up in a rural setting, and so I spent quite a bit of time with the kind of farm kind of activities and raising animals and riding horses and those kinds of things. I always had an affinity for technology, and my dad got us a computer when I was quite young, an Amiga 500, if you can remember those. And so me and my brothers started to learn how to like program and build stuff on that. So that was something I had interest in. If I was ever bought some kind of toy or something like that, I'd end up very quickly pulling it apart and starting to make something else with it. So that was kind of like building was in my DNA, especially growing up in a rural setting. You're kind of always out there making stuff with your hands anyway, whether that's kind of for practical uses or you found some scrap that you want to put into an idea that you had. So that was kind of in my DNA, but I wasn't on that path. I got into it almost by accident, I guess. One of my friends was working in a tech company, and I needed a job, and he was like, "Come and do this." And so I started, if you could call like my engineering career, started by digging holes and running cables for telecommunications companies, and then that kind of progressed up into more serious engineering roles, eventually kind of at the kind of highest level of the technology team in the telecommunications industry before I moved into more of the product and business and marketing sides of things. So yeah, a lot of my expertise on the engineering side was either self-taught or on the job. Went and got certifications with all the different vendors and in that IT and telecommunication space.
Now, how do you
Right
go
on.
from there to blockchain?
Yeah, great question. It was interesting. I kind of left the telco world and IT world and went into startup land, and I'd spent a bit of time before I left in corporate venture. So venture was an interest to me, and kind of venture building was. And I was looking at what were some of the problems with scaling a startup, and my thesis going into building my first venture studio was trying to figure out how to fix that or some of those problems. And when we were looking at one of the things that we discovered was that people kind of put money into startups or effort and time into startups, and they end up building the same components over and over and over again. Like if I was to put a portfolio together and had 10 investments in it, those 10 companies would spend half their capital going and building the same baseline capability over and over again. And so if we were trying to figure out how can you create shared capability that people could use that got them to market faster and also help them reduce the cost to get to market. And when you start going down that path, it's like, well, you can build this kind of shared capability, but then who owns it? And then you start to get into all sorts of tricky commercial relationships. Okay, well, if I'm contributing customers here or IP here or whatever, then I'm adding more value to the owner of that infrastructure. And then along comes decentralized systems, which allow us to kind of have community ownership over infrastructure. And then that opens the door to collaborating and putting those kind of base layers or those substrates of applications below the surface in community infrastructure land and focus on the value add side of things. So that's what got me thinking about Web3 and the blockchain space. What actually got me into it was I had a friend who I was working with on another startup at the time, and he was down in New Zealand, and he's a half Swiss, German, half Tongan guy, and he spends time down here because it's on the way to Tonga. And we were chatting. He's a lawyer. He owns a law firm which he founded up in Zug and Zurich called MME, and we were chatting about what at that time was relatively obscure technology. Smart contracts and cryptocurrencies hadn't gone mainstream yet. And he was talking very intelligently about it. And I was like, how does a lawyer from Switzerland know this much about this obscure technology? And he's like, oh, I helped come up with the structure for the Ethereum Foundation. So he introduced me to a whole bunch of people up there in Crypto Valley. And that's when I really kind of got deep into it and started to cross the chasm and work full time in the Web3 space.
So whatever happened to that first friend that gave you that first gig? Like what's that guy doing today? Is he still around or?
Last I checked, and it wasn't that long ago, he was pretty much doing the same thing.
There you go.
He's a great guy. He's a good friend, but he just didn't have necessarily the same ambition I had to go out and build stuff. So different paths, even though we started at the same place.
Yeah, that happens a lot. I mean, it's like, but that's really the space is all about building, and it's still early days. I mean, it's like people think, well, Bitcoin's been around for 11, 12 years, and it's a nanosecond, really, in time and space. So I think what we wanted to kind of jump into and dive into a little bit is this. This came out a couple weeks ago, the partnership with Ripple and FLUF World. And by the way, I was watching you on another podcast. It was actually the Defiant podcast with Robin and Bruno from I think it's Remnant. Is Remnant? Is that where he's from? But I was watching that, and that was like a little bit odd. I felt like you were doing a little bit of like battle with these guys, because even what they put is like the Futureverse is powered by Ripple, and it was like question mark. There's like 17 question marks on that one right there. And what's interesting is that a lot of what you got right and what was odd is that there was some things that they were missing a lot of people aren't even aware that the XRPL was the first decentralized exchange. Not a
Yeah.
widely known thing, but I mean, it's the fact that it's open source, the fact that it's not so, and it is, I guess it's mostly Ripple's fault for having, at one point the coin was named Ripple, but then they changed it to XRP, open coin, Ripple, then people kind of confuse the two. But how did this partnership come about? And I know one side of the house that kind of floored them a little bit, like, whoa, what is this whole thing with Ripple now? And this whole why do you need it for the root network? And what's the whole meaning behind it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of general misconceptions, and most people I talk to who have reckons haven't actually done their own research and read the white paper and looked at the protocol code and stuff like that. So a lot of those misconceptions can be quite easily answered. I think the second part of it is a lot of people actually misunderstand how the other networks work as well, fundamentally, and so they make assumptions about things that are true of almost any decentralized network, especially proof of work ones, that they think don't apply or do apply to one side or the other. So having a really good understanding at the protocol levels, puts you in a different position when you're making decisions like this. To kind of outline what it is, if you haven't read it yet, I suggest go to the Futureverse.xyz and read the white paper, because that gives a lot of background on what we've been doing behind the scenes, and what the focus of that is to create a better user experience and on-ramps that allow more people to enter the open metaverse. We have, a small community in the crypto space now relative to the entire world's population. And so we've got a lot of work to do to try and bring more and more people into Web3, so we can achieve some of those outcomes we all want around more autonomy in the digital future. In order to do that, we have to solve usability problems. And that's one of the kind of core focuses of the Futureverse white paper, and what we've been building behind the scenes is how can you take a user experience led approach to building technology, as opposed to how can we make a faster Ethereum or a cheaper Ethereum. And so those design reference points that have been used to build protocols to date, I think, have come from the wrong place. So that's the first thing. Like, the Futureverse is about kind of improving usability and reaching into new communities. The second thing is, what's the metaverse? And you look out there, and there's lots of definitions for what it is. But my frame of reference is it's the next evolution of the internet and the digital economy. And actually, in fact, not just the digital economy, because everything now is becoming the digital economy. So it's the next version of our economy and our society in a more immersive space, a digital space. And I don't mean immersive in the sense of necessarily just like VR and AR and those kinds of things, but more like embedded technologies, embedded in more parts of our society, and that way we communicate, collaborate, work, create value, all of those kinds of things. That plus the idea that the boundaries between things that were separate before, gaming, commerce, finance, media, communications, are now being collapsed into one user experience. And so if you put those two things together, the metaverse represents the next stage of society and a much more cohesive, immersive digital user experience. So that's what we think the metaverse is, and that the Futureverse is trying to build for that. And so when you look at that, you kind of look out there and say, well, where are there communities that we can reach, and what are the user experience problems we're trying to solve? And so we pulled together the root network and designed it so that we can solve those user experience problems, and also reach into new communities and help them onboard into this open metaverse. And while looking for partners out there, we saw like this huge community of users, this really great feature, I guess you could call, of XRPL, that they had this really liquid economy out there. They've got this this kind of low cost ecosystem around the payment side of the network. And payments becomes a big part of the metaverse. You're not just talking about NFTs and gaming and stuff like that at that point. Like, where does the next step of commerce go? Well, it exists within these worlds and it interacts with the physical world as well. And so you have a mix of community with assets that we can give superpowers to by, putting XRP out into the root network. We can say, well, now your assets can do new things. They can interact with new types of smart contracts, and they can interact with these metaverse assets. They can interact with NFTs, stuff that they weren't able to do before. And conversely, we can add a killer feature to the network in terms of enhancing liquidity. And so we can go, back and dip into that liquidity pool to bootstrap the network and help to create a better onboarding experience for both validators and users. And so in the same way that we're bridging across to Ethereum's network, we bridge across to the XRP ledger. And we have that integration, and we can start to kind of interact with users on each of those networks in the way that they're used to interacting with, the wallets they're used to interacting with the infrastructure they're used to interacting with, and start to bring more people into this open metaverse construct.
So I have a question, Aaron. Obviously, when we get into the metaverse, a lot of it's going to be represented by different NFTs, and we'll get into FLUF World and Future World and all of that.
Yep.
But I want to know, what can we do with this Lambo when we get into the metaverse? That's really the all important question. So if I get this Lambo and I'm in the metaverse, does it allow me to like zip around the metaverse faster? Can I engage with people? Am I cooler? But I look at the cost here, $534 for this Lambo. Seems like a pretty good deal.
Yeah, no, so this is one of for those who aren't familiar with FLUF World, we have dynamic NFTs, and one of the things you can do with your FLUF is you can change both the background scene that it exists in and the music that goes along with your avatar. And one of the backgrounds is the Lambo background. And what that actually did was it was a trigger for a second drop for people who had that background. They got access to the Atom Car Club, which is another Futureverse collection. And in the Atom Car Club, you get an actual car, a virtual car, to use in the FLUF World metaverses and in the Burn Down game. So this background was kind of a key or a mint pass that just came for free with your FLUF if you were lucky enough to mint one of these ones that turned into a virtual car later on.
That's really
That was
cool.
pretty cool. Yeah. So there it
And
is
as we're
right there.
going on, I do want to give a quick shout out as you're going through that to we've got hang on, here we go. Where'd it go? We've got Mo Meta Music is over here.
Well, hang on a second before we do that.
Shout out to them. I'm just going down a list real quick.
Gotcha.
I want to give a quick shout out to Jim D. And also want to give a quick shout out to Gray Man, because he wanted to know what was going on with Chip and the other dude. So appreciate that, Gray Man. What's up? What's up, Gray Man?
Dude.
The other dude. So it's Chip and the other dude.
The other dude whose name is printed right there. That dude. Oh, Aaron McDonald. that guy. That dude. Is it that dude right there? Yeah. And I wanted to where is it? But I wanted to give a big shout out to Mo Meta Music, because thanks to Scotty over at Mo Meta Music, he was really able to make this happen tonight. So I want a big shout out to Scotty at Mo Meta for really making this happen and kind of like putting Aaron and Jeff and I together. So thanks, man. Really appreciate that. It's always great.
Cheers,
yeah, you know what's great, Aaron, and what's great about this community of crypto, because we're all in the fight together. One of the things you brought up, and I've heard you talk about before, is being an openness maxi, and I think this is really important. So, could you tell us a little bit about how that came about, or what is that? What's that mean to you?
Yeah, I think the reason I have that there is because there's like often too much tribalism within crypto, and I know that we're kind of slightly evolved apes, and that's part of our DNA. But at the same time, there are much more in common between the Web3, the sub communities, than we have that in opposition. And the real challenge is actually convincing the other 99% of the population, that there's some good in this space, and that it means that that we can build something that's meaningful for them and makes their lives better. And if the first thing you see when you come into the Web3 environment is a bunch of people bitching at each other over things that are honestly either no difference at all, just kind of semantics on themes, or inconsequential differences, then that's quite a confronting experience to come into the space. You can solve all the technology problems in the world that you like, but if the first social experience you have coming into the space is this maximalism, and the kind of the bad behavior that stems from it, then none of the technology solutions we build are going to make a difference, because people will be turned off by that. So I'm trying to make a statement like, we're in this together. We might have different views on how to approach it, but we should be all trying to solve the same problem. And if we work closer together and we're looking at the commonalities rather than the differences, we might get further ahead, and we might get more people interested in the space. Make it less toxic.
So well said. And I think we will get there. And I do think that people, I think gently, or I would say at some point, the walls do come down. But just so people know, you're coming to us from New Zealand, correct?
Yeah, I'm in New Zealand. Yep.
Yeah, right on. We have like a lot of we have people, believe it or not, like they're like, and I always love that, because I always wanted to talk to somebody in the future. It's always the greatest thing when you're like in Monday and we're still living in Sunday.
Yeah.
So I just want to be able to.
It's why it's called the Futureverse. We live
right,
in the future over here.
It's an amazing thing, and the whole this whole thing with Ripple. Ripple's got a bad rap, but what I see, like Ryan Selk has put a tweet out there, tag Brad Garlinghouse, CEO of Ripple Labs, and he put a thing out there like, hey, this whole thing about Ripple, let's go Ripple, because I think it's starting to dawn on people that that was the first shot across the bow. But if you look at what regulators are coming for, I mean, mostly let's look at the States, but it'll probably end up in other places too, is because look what's happening. They dropped another lawsuit, and they're identifying 9 other so-called securities, which are not. But again, in going after exchanges, going after insider trading, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but you can see that that's a stepping stone to the exchange. And then you're starting to see how stablecoins are getting regulated. And there's a lot of, why would a central bank, why would a government want to regulate a stable coin, especially when they're talking about their CBDC? So, I
think it's a really important thing, is that, again, like I said before, like we have actually more in common than we have against us. And, the same arguments that are being made against Ripple are now being made against other protocols. You mentioned the 9 protocols that came along with the insider trading charges that came out from the Coinbase activity. And that's a really interesting example, because Coinbase reported that themselves. That was a good thing they did. They were being a responsible member of the community, reporting obviously shitty behavior. And that got usurped, I would say very cleverly, by the SEC, into slipping in these kind of 9 other charges relating to the tokens. And the interesting thing here is they haven't gone after either Coinbase or the issuers of those tokens. They've gone against the guys who did the trading. But what that could do is set up a precedent again, which then kind of has some basis to go and say, well, now they were convicted of trading those illegal securities. They are actually illegal securities, and therefore we can go and do the next step, which is go and kind of take the exchange down or take the guys down. So that's a real possibility, and it puts I think squarely into focus that the fight that's happening at the moment with the SEC is a universal fight for us all. I said this before, like one of the things that I think people have to recognize is that if they'd gone after the Rari boys as the first hit on this stuff, and no disrespect to them, I think they're young kids trying to be innovative, and they're stuck in a system that doesn't recognize the world has changed in the last 50 years. But if they'd gone after them first versus a professional, well-capitalized team, we'd be in a very different place in terms of the wider crypto ecosystem. So it's an important fight for all of us, and the more people that recognize this and get behind it, I think the better for us all.
Yeah, and that's well said, because also too, a lot of when you have a regulatory body like the SEC that has basically unlimited funding, unlimited resources, and they picked the fight with somebody who also had access to resources. Garlinghouse has publicly stated they're already in this for over $100 million, and you're right. Who has that in fight? And you just saw what happened with Library and Jeremy Kaufman, where what just transpired in court last week, which is the judge was a little bit miffed at some of the allegations. And a lot of people don't realize the SEC doesn't win them all. They've recently been losing more than they win. But again, you take a shot and you can hold a project up, and
and even when they lose, they sometimes win, because it creates downstream impacts that are not necessarily enforceable by Department of Justice or other regulators, but have an impact on the market. And maybe that's what they were trying to achieve. I think the other thing that we have to think about in this context is regulation's actually good if it's done well. And every market that exists that is a large, sustainable global market has got there because of regulation, because regulation sets frameworks up that allow investment into them in a sustainable way. And so we shouldn't look at regulation in and of itself as being negative. I think we need to make sure that we have an influence on the regulatory process so that it's done well, because if it is done well, then it will benefit the whole industry, because it gives people more certainty about where they stand. And so while we're waiting for the regulators to catch up, and this isn't like a unique to crypto thing, I think this is another point that a lot of anti-Web3 pundits like to kind of jump on, that it's unregulated. Well, yeah, okay. Skype was an unregulated telecommunications company. Uber was an unregulated taxi company. Sometimes innovation has to push the boundaries for change to happen. And so we're in that phase right now. It's beholden on all of us to try and make sure that we do things in this period that are done with the best interest of the long-term sustainability of the industry and our users. There's plenty of shitty stuff that happens in Web3 that should be regulated to create a safer environment so that we can get the millions and billions of users on board. And so we shouldn't shy away from it, but we should just make sure that it's done, with a good basis of education and knowledge, as opposed to knee-jerk reactions.
Exactly.
Well, a lot
That's
of that
very well.
come through self-regulation. I think if the community
even the
come
finance
together
industry
and have
is self-regulated. Like if you look at even in the States, there is a self-regulatory framework in place that has been built up over the years that governs a lot of the processes in the finance industry there. Those kinds of things are viable paths towards establishing regulation that then becomes legally enforced at a higher level later on. It's a really good approach.
What are you seeing over in New Zealand? I mean, as you look around, and now you're partnering with, creating some partnerships with Ripple, and you see everything that's going on here in the U.S. Obviously, what happens in the U.S. has a major impact here. Obviously, crypto and blockchain is has global impact, and it's far-reaching. So the U.S., when we think about it, it's very U.S. centric. But a lot of what happens here has ramification all over that Chip was just alluding to as well. But what New Zealand, Australia, there's a lot of countries that seem to be always, one step ahead. And many countries seem to be, a couple of steps ahead of where we're at right now. And the powers that be in the U.S. from a regulatory perspective seem to have a lot of animosity, in regards to this decentralized, infrastructure and, crypto at large. But how do you see this from within New Zealand?
So New Zealand's an interesting place because we have relatively modern financial markets regulation that is not technology specific. And so New Zealand New Zealand's regulatory framework allows new technologies to come along, and for people to get at least some initial clarity on the big blocks and what they should and shouldn't be doing without having to get too deep into it. And they've done that by classifying. They've got two kind of categories. You've got securities. So in New Zealand, everything's a security by default. But not everything is a regulated financial product. And then they've got these four distinctive regulated financial products, which have different degrees of regulatory requirements attached to them. And so what that does is it makes it really clear if you're building a product that has the characteristics of any of those things, this is what you need to do, irrespective of whether it's on a piece of paper, or it's on an Excel spreadsheet, or it's on a digital ledger. It doesn't matter. If you're doing those things, you fall into these buckets. And then on the other side, on the kind of everything's a security side, they have frameworks that apply to those, like you can't lie to your customers, or you can't if you say you're going to do something, you should do those things. Like they're kind of more consumer protection style of rules that apply to those things. So you still have to be a good citizen on either side, but there's like a lighter version of regulation, there's a heavier. We also have the value-added service provider framework. So this is kind of a middle ground where the Department of Internal Affairs manages a program which allows this emerging asset class and technology class to fall under supervision, but without having to define all of the kind of possible permutations that might need regulating. And so if you're performing certain services as a digital asset service provider, then you report to the DIA, you explain what you're doing, and there are certain things you have to do, like KYC AML, for example. And so this kind of approach allows innovation to occur without having to force it down a particular product on the financial market side of things. That regulation also applies as technology agnostic. It's not just crypto. So if you're producing V-Bucks inside of a game, you fall into that same category. And so again, they've taken a technology agnostic approach to how they support innovation, which I think is really good. The last part is that New Zealand's, a village, and it's very easy to approach regulators here. And so when you are unsure about what you're doing, you can go and knock on the door and have a conversation. And they're actually, in my experience, very open to having those conversations, and they want to strike the middle ground between protecting consumers and allowing innovation to happen. And we've even been involved with them in discussions about helping them understand what's happening in Web3 so that they can set guidelines and policy up. And that's been a very two-way street inside of those discussions, and also and across the board, not just in financial regulations, but tax and other sectors of the economy. Overall, I think her stance is pretty positive. We just had a report come out from the Ministry of Business Innovation, and it was very much in favour of the opportunity that blockchain technology and Web3 technology represents for the future, and the amount of growth that it's creating inside of New Zealand. So that was really positive. And I don't know if it's still on the table, but in Australia, the last government tabled a bunch of regulatory changes to across the board in Australia that would have probably made Australia one of the kind of easiest places to do crypto business in the world, and one of the friendliest. So whether that'll carry through with the new government or not, but those policies seemed really well thought out. And allowed for this kind of innovation to happen in a safe way. So yeah, we have a good framework down here. I can't say that all the problems have been solved, or that everything's perfect, but I think it's a comfortable middle ground and something that we can continue to work with those people to improve over time.
Right.
That's incredible, because I just want to say that, here, the SEC's come on and have a conversation with us, and then you do, and then they send you a Wells notice, which means you're going to have some type of an enforcement action. But Aaron, if you were a betting guy, and I'm not saying that you are, but who knows, maybe you are, who do you have, based on everything or at least you follow from as far as the SEC v. Ripple case, how do you kind of see that ending? And do you see there being a winner or loser? Do you see there being some sort of a settlement type of thing? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a big question. I feel like it'll end in a settlement, and I don't want to say clearly that I don't have any particular additional knowledge that isn't publicly available on that, but it feels like the rational place to end, and it's where the SEC most often ends. And the shape and nature of that, I don't know. That's probably the tricky part, but I would say it'd be pretty hard to get to a point where they conclude that what happened here was the issuing of an illegal security, and that requires some kind of drastic enforcement action, without that same argument being able to be made to everything else in the space, and therefore collapsing it. So, and I don't feel like that's the goal either, but if I had to, like, a gun to my head and I was putting $1 on it, that's where I would land. The other point of your original question is, I think the US has the most to lose, which is why they are taking such an aggressive position on this, because if decentralization, happens in the way that we all think it could in the wider economy, then they lose a lot of soft power that they have today, that's gained through the trade in US dollars and the commodity markets and stuff that sit around that. So if you're in their seats, this is probably one of your bigger existential threats if you're looking at through a certain lens. It could be the other way if you look at through the other lens, and it could make enforcing your soft power a lot easier, which is not an outcome we want either. But I think the lens at the moment is very much that it represents a threat to that soft power, and therefore it's something they take, with a, that's the frame of reference they're working from when they look at it.
But then I think what, the emphasis there is really going to be, there's specific individuals that are concerned about their power. So it's not so much from a, political, global political perspective to see where the U.S., dominates or doesn't dominate the economic, outcomes or decisions, and, using economics to leverage political outcome. It seems like there's certain groups that are more concerned about their power, their money, and the fact that it's always been the way they've done it. And we're seeing kind of the unfolding of some of that here in the US, that the old way of doing things is no longer going to be the new way. And the decentralized nature of things is really putting more of a spotlight on the corruptive nature. And so hopefully, we're seeing that in the US. We're seeing that in a lot of places now.
I think it's kind of a dead meme, the whole notion of nation states. And if you think about the kind of the way that the metaverse shapes up long term, if you pull that drawstring back on the bow a little bit further, this whole idea of nation states is kind of organized around the idea of property rights and protection of property rights. Like, what's the main benefit you get for being part of a nation state? Well, that's probably property rights enforcement. And when most of the things we value are physical things that exist within the boundaries of those physical domains, then they become very useful and powerful things. But as society moves more and more into the digital space, and the more things we value are in the digital space, then the whole idea of property rights changes, because of the technology allows that that to be handled without enforcement from a third party. Then the whole idea of a nation becomes very outdated, And I think as we kind of move through society and become more and more in the metaverse, let's say, for want of a better way to phrase it, they're going to lose a lot of the power they have just by the nature of technology changing what it means to be a citizen and what we value and what things they're protecting.
Well, especially if through the metaverse, we get to represent, like these guys here, and this is, pretty cool. I'm going through a lot of the NFTs here, but I like how you get the music behind it.
Yeah.
You get the nice 3D, and it's really cool because it's going through, you have a whole bunch of different ones and they're really cool. You got the
And we've done some great music collabs as well with the likes of Timbaland and other kind of producers out there that have produced cool tracks that sit behind these. And those tracks are interjected, so you can kind of pop the track out as a separate NFT and trade that with someone else for
no
one
kidding.
that you like. Yeah, and also like kind of holding these assets here is going to give you the first exposure to the Root network as well. So being part of the community now, when we start to launch the Root network later this year, you'll get access to the economics of the Root network through having one of these fluffs.
By having the NFT. Now, if you have access to the Root network, how does that, benefit an individual?
Yeah, so
getting into the
so you'll be able to use the tokens within the network, stake them to become a part of the network governance and validator as a validator in the network, earn block rewards in the network as a part of being a validator or running a node, and obviously participate in all of the in-world economies that exist on top of this.
Nice.
Sounds really cool.
Nice.
And just so I understand too, it's also 3D rigged, so it's kind of universal. So that's the thing, that you're not necessarily locked in. You can take that 3D rigged character into, right? And that's the whole, I think that right there, that is brilliant thinking right there.
Oh, you can take this. So is it interoperable to move from metaverse to metaverse? Is that the idea?
Yeah. So
how does it?
So behind each one of these is a set of 3D models, which I think this might be alpha for the chat. So if you're listening here, we've got all those 3D models uploaded into the underground, but we haven't turned that feature on for the community. That'll happen next week. And so you'll be able to go in there, download the files, play with them, make your own animations, import them into games. Interoperability is a really big part of what we've been building in the Futureverse, and so making those assets your own. You own the IP if you own the avatar, so you can go and start to create your own businesses off the top of that, your own games, whatever it happens to be.
And that was a question. You just brought that up. So you do own the IP. Somebody brought that up. They had asked that.
Yeah.
That's really fantastic. I wanted to talk about this other thing too, is what kind of sorcery is this right here? Okay, this is so I'm looking at all I watch your feed and I look at this stuff, but it says, for a comparison between FLUF World thingies, AI avatars powered by our own in-house, which is the altered state machine AI, one mid-journey for the following description. So here's the description is and I'm not going to read it all, but Dorothy from Wizard of Oz, standing on a hill, vintage, 2D, portrait, character design, rule of thirds elements, Baroque, white ink, all this stuff. And then we end up getting this.
Yeah.
So that's
the first one there is from Midjourney, which is like a closed source, centralized AI protocol, or not protocol, but AI that essentially makes digital art. And what we've been building, if you scroll down, is a decentralized version, which is powered by the altered state machine protocol. And what altered state machine does is allows NFTs to own individual AI agents and for the user to kind of be in control of that AI. And so within FLUF World, we created these 3D spiders that are actually AI artists. And so the next version of the user interface that rolls out in the underground for the thingies will allow users to go in and have their 3D spider create art like this. And interact with their own AI.
That's really incredible, man. I mean,
and that's just the first step. Like the next version, which we have in the product development, and I've seen already, creates objects, so 3D objects, not just art. And the next version of that is creating spaces, so you can create world spaces with your AI.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the beauty of technology. I see something like that. I mean, vastly different, incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. I'm going through your collections, and if you're creating this interoperable environment, there's the Lambo we were referencing earlier, and then as you go into this, you have the
So if you
you're
click
talking
on the
about
thingies up there,
there they are.
Those are cool things.
So,
And there's
these
like these
thingies
little
are artists.
oh, the thingies are
Yeah, they're actually an AI artist.
huh. It's interesting. So you can all right. That's let me open one. Okay, let's see if we can open the full.
So when you say, just to clarify that, when you say they're the artist, right? So you get this, so you have this NFT, and now that's what'll help create the AI art. Is that what you're?
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah. So it's a way for you to interact with the AI by using these characters. And
By using a character. It's interesting.
yeah.
Do they have different characteristics of them, or is it just
So each one of the thingies is actually a piece of AI art in itself. So if you look at them, the fur patterns on each one of them is unique. So each one has its own individual fur pattern, and that pattern was generated by tasking an AI to paint 10,000 UV maps, which then fold up into these 3D models. So they're an AI art. They are a piece of AI art, and they are AI artists. It's a little bit Inception-y there.
Some pretty.
So does
pretty
each
cool.
one have a different art trait? So if you have this guy, his art outcome is going to be different.
There's two things that impact the art. One is the backpacks they're wearing. So each backpack forms a class of art, and two is the fur pattern. So we take that fur pattern and use it to create a brain. And what the brain is giving that particular thingy its own perception of the world. So when you ask that same string of questions that you brought up earlier, to one, thingy number 0 and thingy number 1, they will draw a different picture because they see the world differently.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, really amazing.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and so, it's this kind of creativity, it's this kind of impact, and I think what's ultimately amazing is that you're empowering communities of humans to go to that next level.
Yeah,
that made me sound almost like Darth Vader, like in the background when you're doing that. I was like, it felt like some Jeff, I'm talking to you from, it's like some other thing. It's amazing. Hey, by the way, Aaron, this is not totally off the topic question. You know how you meet somebody and you go like, hey, where are you from? They're like, I'm from France. You're like, hey, do you know so and so? Yeah, like, it's kind of a random thing. So let me ask you, do you know Kim.com? You ever hung out with Kim.com there?
I haven't actually hung out with him. I obviously know who he is, and I know that he's a New Zealander, but I have never actually gone and hung out. I know people who have, and you're right. Generally, when you ask that question to a New Zealander, they might, they'll know the person or know someone that knows the person. But in this case, I haven't.
Well, he has that giant compound he talks about. He's got like 30 kids or something like that. I don't know. There's always like a new, something like that. But I always thought like, I think you've got the street cred to be invited to the next Kim.com party. I mean, I feel like that has to happen. I mean, why wouldn't that happen? If Kim.com, you guys know someone, we send him a tweet and say, man, come on. Aaron's earned it, man. He's earned his wings, but also know he's big time in the space as well. And what's really great about him too is that he used to be a maxi, but you see like in recent conversations and some web stuff, he's kind of like backed off that a little bit. Like, hey, this is a giant universe, and I kind of like to see that. You kind of like to see evolution of people, and like it's a thought. You hold on to it loosely until you can hold on to it tightly and own it. But I came in through a Bitcoin maxi who's well known in the space. He likes his anonymity, and I was all about Bitcoin, man, and Ripple's it's a banker's coin and this and that. And then, you do some research and you're like, okay, that was wrong.
Yeah, I
Have you-
think it's really important to that some of that tribalism happens early on because it bootstraps the community and gives them a focus. But at a certain point, it becomes destructive, and I think now we're at a point in the evolution of Web3 where it's destructive, because we're turning off that next generation of users with that behavior. And when they look out, from the outside in, they don't see the distinctions that we're talking about. And actually, those distinctions are pretty minor anyway. All they see is the fighting. And we have this imagination that the world kind of knows all of the stuff that we know and we don't. I think a really good example of this was what happened with Microsoft and Minecraft and the NFT thing that came out. You look at the description or the kind of statement they put up around that and saying why they made the decision and what was an NFT, and they were trying to explain all this stuff. And in the sentence about what an NFT was, they were talking about essentially a container that can contain digital images or other things that are often used, often purchased with Bitcoin. So cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, it's said in this thing, and everyone is in the space is like, Microsoft's not going to make it because they don't know that no one buys NFTs with Bitcoin. But that misses the point. The point was that their audience is everyone outside of the space, and none of those people know what Ethereum is. They probably maybe know what Bitcoin is. And so they had to use Bitcoin in that language, not because they're dumb and they don't actually understand what's going on. It's because most of the world doesn't know what we know. And so we need to be really realistic about the things outside of our bubble when we're having these conversations about how to grow this space.
That's a great point. That's a really solid point, on Bitcoin, and just to kind of re-emphasize that. But a lot of people, when we hear it within the political echelon, also they keep referencing Bitcoin. But that's to your point, that's what they know, and they don't. Even though they might have heard some rumblings about some other assets, to them, Bitcoin is almost becoming synonymous with cryptocurrencies. So it's not going to be altcoins and Bitcoin. Bitcoin is just kind of representative of everything.
On the outside world, it is. They don't see the difference. And honestly, and I've said this 1,000 times before, the successful, for us being successful in this space means making the technology invisible. Yes, you'll have passionate fans around protocols. That will happen just like it does today. There are people who are passionate about Linux, but 90% of people who use Linux technology, 99% of people who use Linux technology, which is pervasive throughout the web, don't know that it exists, don't care that it exists, and they shouldn't have to. If I had to go and learn about Linux in order to use a web application, no one would use the internet. And so our job as builders is to make the technology invisible. Yes, a small number of people will get their heads around it and they'll be like, trying to dig into the protocols and the nuances and all those kinds of things. But just like 99% of people who use email or Netflix have no idea how those things work, that should be success for us. And so the day we actually stop talking about the technology and we start demonstrating people what the utility is and how it makes their life better, is the day we start winning.
Well, that's it. And that goes for everything. So I think that's such a solid point. Most people have no idea how cereal's made. They don't know how meat is produced. They don't know where milk comes from. They don't even know, you pull oil out of the ground and you get gas. How do you get gas that you put in your tank? Nobody knows how
they don't know the
works.
refining process.
So
they don't care. The whole point is they shouldn't care, right?
Exactly. And Chip's brought that up a lot. It has to be invisible. And that's what brings mass adoption.
Sir John had this question for you, Aaron. He said, since you're a co-founder of many companies and projects, what would you honestly say the percentage of them you'd be okay with succeeding on a long-term basis as average 6 years worldwide and less in crypto? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like most venture projects don't make it. That's the first thing. Like especially when you're in this space, you have to kind of take everything you see with that viewpoint, is that there's a lot of innovation happening, and there's lots of cool stuff being built, but most of it isn't going to make it. So what we tried to do with our portfolio strategy was create something called a connected venture portfolio to fix that problem, because most VCs go into this and they invest capital and they know that 1 out of 10 of their bets is going to be successful, and that's enough. We have this kind of, I guess, saying or analogy, which is we'd rather build a herd of zebras than a unicorn, because unicorns don't actually exist. And so that's why they're called unicorns, because they're so unlikely to ever happen that they're named after a mythical beast that doesn't exist.
Wait,
but if you
zebras
create
exist? Wait.
well, zebras exist, well, we're not talking about the nature of reality here. We can get into that,
right.
Another
solid
chat.
point.
But but so we constructed the portfolio strategy so that these companies could work together, leverage each other's strengths, and be more resilient. And so we hope to see a high percentage of our portfolio companies become successful. And because they're working together, it gives them more optionality in how they get that success to happen. So in some cases, an individual company hasn't made it, but they've been able to be absorbed by another company because they solved a problem for them. They become a technology feature of another project or a product option of another project, as opposed to having to be set out by themselves and be successful by themselves. And that's really the nature of herds. They're really, they're built to create the collective goal of the herd is to be successful, as opposed to an individual animal in the herd.
And that really goes to the point that not every project is actually solving a problem that needs solving. But if they do create something, maybe the technology they created for their problem solver is pretty amazing. And we see that in a lot of different industries. So that's a really solid point.
And it's a really interesting part of the external view on Web3 as well. It's like they see all these kind of Rube Goldberg, like complex technology solutions to simple problems in their minds. And a certain extent, they're right. Oh, why don't you just do that on SQL? And in some cases, you really should. And in other cases, they missed the point of what that person was trying to do.
Only in Iceland, though.
They do in the metaverse. And so if you take a different look at it, and I've lost my train of thought.
Sorry, I always say when someone throws a comment up there.
Chip. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's sidetracked.
No, it's all good.
Jim D. Unicorns exist in culture as a concept, so exist abstractly, and will never go extinct. There we go. Everybody loves unicorns. I think it's like you just told our entire audience that Santa Claus isn't real.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, guys.
Well, but you're absolutely right. It's like the most unlikely thing to happen. But if it was to happen, and you did create a unicorn, it's absolutely true with VC and I mean it's that's that whole run of it. But anyway, we're getting up on time here. Listen, Aaron, I wanted to really thank you and congratulate you on all the success, and for you and your team, because you got a great team of visionaries that are taking something that doesn't exist and putting it into reality. And that right there takes a lot of effort. But you're probably having some fun along the way as far as, and also some challenges. But I just want to say, we wish you much success in that. And it's just great having you on the chain to come talk it out. And so the community could learn a little bit more about you. I mean, so thank you for coming on here. Big shout out to Scotty from Mo Meta Music. And, I almost said Mo Money, Jeff. Mo Money.
Mo Money.
Thanks for having me on, and really great chat, and always happy to come on again in the future and show some more stuff that the team have been building. For now, just jump into our Discords or follow us on Twitter and get the latest updates.
Yeah, already doing that. Jeff, anything you want to say before we get out of here, and then we'll just close with Aaron on the way.
Apologize to Oscar because unicorns, now that he realized
tweet the real. No, Oscar's.
And I think also Sir John, sorry about that, spreading misinformation about Santa.
I wish I had time to show you Oscar's his pillars of enforcement, because Oscar's a funny guy, but he does some great stuff, man. So that's all we have, guys. We will see you from all of us, Jeff, Aaron, Chip. We're out of here. If you just hang out for 1 second, Aaron, well, guys, we will see you on the next one. Out.
Are you down with OTC? Please like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when the next video drops.